We think of Vikings as fierce raiders, warriors charging with axes, shields, and fire. But the true horror of the Viking Age began after the fighting stopped. When the shield walls broke and the smoke cleared, the real victims were not the men on the battlefield, but the women left behind. What happened to them was not random brutality. It was a system, an economy of slavery, forced marriages, and ritualized abuse. The sagas whisper about raids and victories, but archaeology, chronicles, and even Viking law codes reveal a darker truth. Women were not just casualties of war. They were the objective. This is the side of Viking history you were never taught. When Vikings raided, silver and gold were only part of the prize. The most valuable resource they carried home was human. Women and children were captured in staggering numbers, and their fate was rarely recorded in the chronicles of the time. But archaeology fills the silence. Excavations in Dublin, the heart of Viking power in Ireland, reveal shackles made for women's wrists and children's ankles. The stone foundations of warehouses still bear the marks of human cargo. This wasn't random plunder, it was infrastructure. A slave market, purpose-built to process flesh. Even the prices survive. Runic inscriptions in Schleswig list the going rate: 20 silver pieces for a young woman, 15 for a mother, 10 if she was injured in the raid. These weren't people in the Viking economy, they were inventory. And Dublin's slave trade wasn't local. Ship manifests carved in runes list human cargo alongside furs and amber. Women taken from Ireland or Scotland could be sold in Norway, in Byzantium, even as far as Baghdad. Fair-skinned women were a luxury item in Easter markets, fetching premium prices. The Viking Age wasn't just an age of conquest, it was an age of trafficking. Raids weren't simply about burning monasteries or looting villages. They were supply runs. The demand for women was constant, and the Norse supplied it with ruthless efficiency. The chronicles often stop after listing how many warriors died in a raid. But what they leave unsaid is revealed in the ground. At Portmarnock, Irish annals record the death of 47 men. They say nothing about the 53 women found in the longhouses. Yet nearby bog sites tell the real story, the remains of 23 women, all showing the same pattern of injuries. Skull fractures from behind. Defensive cuts across their arms. Broken ribs from prolonged assaults. These were not battlefield deaths. These were executions, slow, deliberate, systematic. The brutality wasn't chaos, it was policy. Viking law codes spelled it out with cold precision. A defeated warrior's wife became the property of his killer. Not as a servant, but as a wife. The Gragas laws of Iceland even detailed the timeline. The captor had 3 days to declare ownership in front of witnesses. After that, other warriors could contest his claim. Women were traded, fought over, and reduced to legal property in the eyes of the Norse. The sagas romanticize Viking honor and glory. But in reality, the violence after battle was every bit as structured as the shield wall. Only this time, the battlefield was the bodies of women. In Viking culture, even death did not free women from violence. Funeral rites demanded that a warrior's possessions be burned or buried with him. His weapons, his horses, and often, his women. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan recorded a Viking funeral on the Volga in 921. He described how a slave girl was drugged, ritually raped, and then strangled before being laid beside her dead master. For centuries, his account was dismissed as exaggeration. But archaeology tells us it was not. Female skeletons found in Scandinavian ship burials show clear signs of strangulation. Traces of hallucinogenic plants found with their remains suggest the women were drugged first, made compliant before being killed. And for those not sacrificed, the fate was no better. Forced marriage was not just tolerated, it was law. A warrior who killed an enemy could claim his wife as his own, declaring ownership before witnesses. The woman had no voice, no choice, no escape. The children born from such unions were considered legitimate, making rape a legal path to inheritance and power. For the Vikings, women were property that breathed. Whether in life, in marriage, or in death, their bodies served the system. Archaeology uncovers an even darker layer of Viking society, one that targeted not just women, but their children. Excavations at Viking camps like Thetford have revealed infant bones scattered in trash heaps. These were not stillbirths. The evidence is unmistakable. Skulls crushed by blunt force, tiny ribs broken by deliberate blows. These were killings, efficient, practiced, almost routine. The victims were the children of captive women, born from rape. Viking law was explicit. If the mother was a slave, the child was a slave. If the child was too young to work, the child died. Economics dictated survival. But the system went further. Portable iron pens, breeding cages, were found in Viking baggage trains, designed to transport captives during campaigns. In York, archaeologists uncovered a facility with dozens of stone cells, each fitted with chains. The soil revealed decades of use, and the bones showed repeated pregnancies, followed by disposal once the women were no longer useful. Even genetics confirms this hidden industry. Modern studies of Icelandic and Norwegian DNA reveal that up to half of their maternal ancestry traces back to Celtic and British Isles women. Thousands of women, systematically taken, forced into unions, and absorbed into Norse bloodlines. This was not chaos. It was a system, an economy built on control, reproduction, and elimination. As Viking power began to crumble in the late 10th century, their own practices turned inward. Excavations at Repton in England uncovered a mass grave containing over 200 women. The evidence was chilling: blunt force trauma, strangulation, even poisoning. But isotope analysis revealed these women weren't captives. They were Norse wives and daughters, killed by their own people to prevent their capture by enemies. On one skull, someone carved 3 words in Old Norse: "Better this way." A justification, written into bone. Fathers killing daughters, husbands killing wives, believing death was mercy compared to what awaited them in enemy hands. They knew the system too well, because they had built it. And when the Viking Age ended, the structures of exploitation did not vanish. Norman conquerors in England adopted the same practices: women listed as property in the Domesday Book, holding cells inside castle courtyards, and forced marriages treated as legal contracts. The names changed, but the system endured. The legacy was more than cultural, it was biological. Modern DNA across Scandinavia carries the proof: the forced assimilation of thousands of women across centuries, their lives erased but their bloodlines surviving. The sagas are silent on this truth. But the bones, the graves, and the scars in the record speak louder than the myths. The Vikings are remembered as fearless warriors, explorers, and seafarers. But beneath the myths of glory lies a darker truth. Their raids were not just about land or treasure, they were about people. Women's bodies became the battlefield, the economy, and the legacy of the Viking Age. The sagas rarely mention it. The chronicles often look away. But the evidence, bones in graves, inscriptions on stone, DNA in modern bloodlines, cannot be silenced. The Viking Age was not only an era of conquest. It was an era of systematic exploitation, where suffering was written into law, ritual, and commerce. And when their power collapsed, the system they built lived on under new names and new rulers. The shields and swords are long gone. But the silence of history has preserved their myth far longer than it should have. The truth is simple: